Today we're going to talk about the long road to Kevin McCarthy's election as Speaker and what the Republican hostage takers got in return for it. And I interview Senator Amy Klobuchar about the long-awaited overhaul of the Electoral Count Act and what's being done to prevent another Taylor Swift concert ticket debacle as far as Ticketmaster is concerned on the antitrust front. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So it took 12 years and 9,000 ballots, but we finally got there. Kevin McCarthy has finally won the Speaker's gavel in what was honestly one of the biggest displays of dysfunction and pandemonium that I have ever seen. There's a photo going around from AP photographer Andrew Harnick showing a Republican lawmaker physically restraining another Republican lawmaker who is apparently lunging at Matt Gaetz for holding up the Speaker's election after the 14th ballot Friday night around midnight, which I think is a pretty good microcosm of the entirety of the last few days. But the fact that the whole process took so long was owed to the fact that a faction of far-right extremists within that party, Gaetz, Boebert, Biggs, Harris, and some other House Freedom Caucus members, decided to hold the election hostage until they could exact concessions from Kevin McCarthy. Now, I don't believe that we have the final updated rules package yet, but according to reporting, those concessions include just one member being able to introduce a motion to vacate, which is basically a no-confidence vote against the Speaker, meaning that if just one of these lunatics is unhappy, they force a vote, and we're back right in the middle of this entire mess all over again. It includes committee spots for the holdouts, including 3 spots on the Rules Committee, which is the committee that decides what legislation ultimately makes it to the floor. And most importantly, and this is according to Manu Raju of CNN, the holdouts wouldn't agree to a clean debt ceiling increase, meaning that they're going to tie conditions to the debt ceiling, and if those conditions aren't met, then we would default on our national debt, which means the U.S. and the global economy would crater, and markets across the world would plunge. That's never happened before, and there's good reason that it's never happened before, because it doesn't exactly make sense that our own government would crater our own economy. But then again, it's been a century since the last time the majority party took 15 ballots before they can even agree on a speaker, so there's really no rule book here. And because McCarthy was so drunk with ambition to become Speaker, he relented on all of these points, meaning that he'll occupy a now powerless office as Speaker, having handed this dangerous faction of extremist Republicans a ton of committee spots, where they will have the power now to sink our economy if they choose to. But hey, at least Kevin McCarthy gets that sign above the door in the Speaker's office, and at the end of the day, that's all that really matters here. Now, in terms of this whole process and the shit-showness of it all, it might seem to the rest of us like the once-in-a-century humiliation that it was. But for those extremist Republicans, the Gaetz and Boeberts and all them, the dysfunction isn't a problem, it's the point. Like, they're not looking to fix anything because their goal is breaking it. These Republicans have been running for years on the idea that government isn't the solution, it's the problem. And in order to prove that it's the problem, they have a vested interest in breaking it. And so that's exactly what they themselves are going to do. And they'll point to the thing that they just broke as evidence that the government can't work. But if the government isn't working, it's because someone is breaking it. And that's what these people just did. Like, in a way, when you have people who aren't susceptible to shame and who traffic in chaos, like Gaetz and Boebert and all them, it really is a win-win for them. Like, just take this situation right here. On one hand, if Kevin McCarthy and his allies caved, then those people would get rewarded with committee spots and leverage and power. And if the Kevin McCarthy allies didn't cave, then those people get the same exact dysfunction that they thrive off of anyway. And they get to go on TV and build their brands even more, which they love. So I hope Kevin McCarthy feels the pain as the result of this, because he emboldened these very people every single step of the way. Like, he kowtowed to them and refused to condemn them, all because he was so desperate to curry favor for the eventual Speaker's vote. With the irony being that those very people he empowered used that power to basically castrate him. Kevin McCarthy will come into office as the weakest Speaker in U.S. history. And you know what? He did it to himself. This is the whole leopard eating faces thing, right? You don't spend 6 years nurturing the leopards eating faces party and then get to act surprised when the leopards eat your face too. One more point here. You know, I spoke about this a couple weeks ago, and I think it bears repeating now because it played out way quicker than I thought it would. I mentioned in a previous episode that there is a silver lining to Republicans taking the House, and that is that people will be able to see the difference between the two parties in real time. They'll be able to see firsthand the difference between what happens when Democrats had full control of government, which is that we got an infrastructure upgrade and a gun safety bill and domestic semiconductor manufacturing back in the U.S., and veteran health care and climate spending, lower prescription drug costs and capped out-of-pocket costs for seniors. And now they'll be able to watch a Republican House with the exact same size majority that Democrats had, while they threaten to crater the U.S. economy over an investigation into Hunter Biden's dick pics and a hearing about pronouns. Like, this isn't going to be the Republicans from the minority pretending that they would be these responsible stewards of government. It's going to be Republicans from the majority in the House now trying to impeach Joe Biden over what color clothes he's wearing because they won't be able to help themselves. And you're kidding yourselves if you think that that dysfunction that we just witnessed over the past week is going to be a selling point for Republicans in the next election. And one more thing here that I think is worth mentioning, and that is that we heard from Hakeem Jeffries for the first time as minority leader in the House. And that guy, without a teleprompter, did this.
But I also want to make clear that we will never compromise our principles. House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy, benevolence over bigotry, the Constitution over the cult, democracy over demagogues, economic opportunity over extremism, freedom over fascism, governing over gaslighting, hopefulness over hatred, inclusion over isolation, justice over judicial overreach, knowledge over kangaroo courts, liberty over limitation, maturity over Mar-a-Lago, normalcy over negativity, opportunity over obstruction, people over politics, quality of life issues over QAnon, reason over racism, substance over slander, triumph over tyranny, understanding over ugliness, voting rights over voter suppression, working families over the well-connected, xenial over xenophobia, yes we can over you can't do it, and zealous representation over zero-sum confrontation. We will always do the right thing by the American people.
The entire alphabet, A to Z, with no teleprompter. And then Kevin McCarthy took to the lectern, and here is just a small sampling of the genius oratory that followed.
My most favorite spot in this building is not in this chamber. It's in the chamber they met before, in Statuary Hall. It's my favorite place to take people on a tour. You see, it's where Abraham Lincoln served. He was just a one-term congressman, sat in the back. I like to go to that spot, and I like to stand where he stood. I like to do it at night when people aren't around. I like to look over and look at the clock. Because that's the same clock and same view that Abraham Lincoln saw. As a Congress, we can only operate if we cooperate. My door will be open. I'd like you to come by. I want you to see, as you walk down the hall, a large portrait of Lincoln. I want you to go into that conference room, and I want you to see another portrait. My members know of this. It's of Washington crossing the Delaware. You all know the story. It happened on Christmas, 1776. There was no iPhone to take a picture.
Woof. It took Kevin McCarthy 15 rounds to get elected speaker, but I think the cruelest thing to happen to him was that he had to follow Hakeem Jeffries for this speech. So it's going to be a long 2 years, but who knows? If the speaker's election was any indication, maybe the Republican Party's own dysfunction will stop them from doing much damage to begin with. Here's a preview of my interview with Senator Klobuchar. Can I get a general response to what we've seen in the House, which is this more than once in a century inability to elect a speaker of their own party?
I think a lot of people around the country, including people in my own state that I've seen, in the middle of a snowstorm, people are somehow making it through and going to work. And they're like, what is going on out there? We have a lot to do this year. Of course, there's the obvious issue of the debt ceiling, but there's workforce issues. There are public safety, all kinds of things we got to work on. And there they are in front of not just our country, but the world, unable to put in place their leader. And I think that they better get their act together soon, because just as we watch governments having issues in other countries, and it affects how people feel about the United States, and it affects how people feel within the United States. With Donald Trump still looming out there, they've got to get their act together and come together, because I literally can't believe this, but I am just keeping on doing what we're doing out here in Minnesota and waiting for the white smoke to come up from House of Representatives.
To check out that full interview with Senator Klobuchar, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. And as always, if you want to see more of this content, make sure to hit the subscribe button, also right here on this screen.